I'm back in my studio ready to start a new project, and I have this piece here which I found a little while ago in a antique store, and I thought great shape, great price, just £20 English money, and didn't really look at it too much until I got it back home and realized that no wonder it was so cheap, because it has every problem under the sun, which I will show you. I'm going to talk through how I'm going to rectify some of those problems, but really just kick back and enjoy the ride. I'm going to have a little bit of fun and experiment with the IOD paint inlays and just have a bit of fun with this piece. I'm not that in love with it because I know what's wrong with it, but I will put it right, and I'm going to do that with you guys. So let's take a closer look at the actual piece. So let's talk the problems that this piece has. So it has 4 issues that I can see at this stage, which is quite a lot of work to do before we even get creative with paint. So the first one is the trim that sits around this edge on the top. For some reason, it comes out proud at either end of the piece. It's almost like this trim has been stuck on a little too far out at each end, and then it's pushing out. So it's not something that I really like. So my idea is to remove the trim, see if I can take it off in one piece and reapply the whole trim back round. If that doesn't work, we may go for a square edge. The third thing that I could do is add a wood U-bend moulding to the edge to add a bit of decorative touch to the edge. So that's one thing that is an issue that I've got to work on. The second thing is the lower hinge on this side. I think the door has been pushed too far back on itself and it's popped. It's split the wood on the front and the screws are holding into nothing really. So that's got to be unscrewed, glued and fixed, the holes filled and then re-screwed back in that door. So that's another whole issue. While we're inside, I did notice this when I bought it and I thought that's an easy fix. There is no back to the piece and somebody stuck a New York canvas print in the back. So I do want to replace that with a little bit of hardboard at the back of there. There was also a huge chip out of this leg. That's never an issue. Some hard filler will fix that. But the final issue, which I really never noticed as I was purchasing this piece, is it's got woodworm. Now, I'm not quite sure in other countries whether you get woodworm, you might have termite issues. Pop that in the comments, because it'd be interesting for me to know what kind of pests that you get into timber. We have woodworm in the UK when pieces of furniture, like old pieces of furniture like this, are stored in damp places like garages. The woodworm gets into the wood and it chews away at it, and it does need to be treated. I don't think this is active. I think it's been in a warm environment ever since it had the woodworm, so that generally they kind of vacate the building at that point. But nevertheless, I cannot let this go forward onto a new home without treating the woodworm. So the little holes, I'm going to take a small syringe and just pump in some woodworm treatment into that. Fill the holes, because if I don't fill the holes and they're visible through my paint effect, it will make people a little bit more worried whether this is safe to go in their home. So all of that work's got to be done before we can get creative with paint and paint inlays. So I'll probably speed some of that up, but I'll talk you through what I'm actually doing as I go through that process of fixing this cabinet before we can do any work to it. Such a lot of work, but this is a furniture painter's life. This piece of furniture has had a long life as well, and it really does deserve to go forward and be loved once again. Well, a screwdriver made light work of removing that front piece of trim. There was also additional nails going through, so I'm pulling them out with the end of the hammer. Also, I've made the quick decision not to remove the side trims because they were nice and level. I'm just using a junior hacksaw and following the 45-degree angle on each corner and just removing a small sliver, which will allow that front trim to lay down flat. So I'm taking my time to unscrew all of the hinges on this door so that I can get access to where this split is in the wood. As you can see, I've left a screwdriver just wedged underneath that split so that I can poke in some glue around all of the edges of that split, making sure it goes right underneath, pushing it in with my finger, smoothing out, and then I'm going to use a clamp to hold into place while the glue goes off. Now to reattach the trim to the top surface, I'm using Titebond quick and thick glue, which does what it says on the container. It goes off pretty quick, and I'm using some really thin nails just to hold this into place while the glue goes off, and it should be as good as new. You might notice here I've removed the clamps. I've gone for these two smaller ones just so the piece is easier to work on whilst that quick and thick glue is going off. The canvas is gone. I'm using some pliers just to remove any of the staples, anything that is sticking out, ready to reattach that new back plate, which I'm going to cut in a little while. Also, here, there was extra bits of trim on the end. I don't know why. It seemed to be much too big for the overall piece. And finally, the application of the woodworm treatment. So I've got a very small syringe and I'm just taking all of my time to locate each hole, and I'm pressing the treatment into that hole so it goes in nice and deep. I'm going to do this over the whole piece, underneath, all of the sides, the interior, everywhere. I do not want any of this woodworm to be active any longer. So once that's completed, I'm going to go in with a little bit of quick drying filler so that I can sand away nice and level for the end product. The final part of the job is to measure out a new backboard. Just taking my time with a set square to make sure that it is perfect for that aperture. Then I'm going to use a rough cutting saw just to cut out any rough edges I'm not too worried about, because that's going to be hidden from behind. So that's just about all of the fixes for this piece. I know it looked quite simple because I sped up this video, but it did take quite a while just to get this piece of furniture into a good shape before moving forward. But I thought it would be useful for you guys just to see that furniture painting sometimes can be quite challenging. Some of the prep work takes much longer than the actual paint work. But anyway, it's all done. I'm pretty happy with where it's at. Let's move forward into getting creative with the overall piece. Okay, so I have all of my repairs done. The woodworm is treated, filled and sanded. The door back on. I have my back plate to go on the back. It is a bit rough, but you won't see any of these. I'm going to leave this out until after I finish because I'm going to paint the inside, but I'm also going to paint this, so it'll be easier to paint with the hole through the back. The hinge fix is good. So I'm really now onto the stage with my little friend, on the stage of prep work with paint. So there are a few things that can happen here. Now, if you're worried about bleed through, which I would be, once you've used a woodworm treatment and sanded the finish off the surface of the cabinet, this can cause bleed through. I've got a little friend hanging on my back. So that will really cause bleed through on the piece. So I would give it a primer, a stain blocking primer at this stage, but I'm not going to do that. You know me, I quite like those anomalies that come with a project with little issues, and I'll fix them along the way. So I'm just going to go in with a base coat of something dark. I'm thinking I might mix a little bit of salt wash and apply some stippling to the edges so that we can sand back afterwards once the paint inlay is on. So I'm going to mix a colour of graphite and enfleur, so it's really quite dark, so those lovely dark textures can come through. What do you think, Lily? What do you think? Yes, she thinks yes. So that's what we're going to do. So on with the priming coat, just an any what way brush stroke over the whole piece, and then we'll add a touch of salt wash. After my little 10-minute break with drying on the canvas coat, it is super hot in the workshop. That's why Lily is molting, that's why I'm covered in fur. And I'm not going to worry about the fur on the piece because we're going to be adding salt wash. This is going to add just another layer of texture. So I'm going to hit some of the areas where I might want to distress back at the end of the project. Also, at this point, Where I've put the treatment for the woodworm, I can see bleed through. The little spots where they were, I'm not worrying about it. I know they'll be more apparent when I put the lighter coat on to apply the paint inlays, but we're gonna see what happens. They're natural, they look good, so we're gonna work with them. As long as they don't look like true woodworm holes, I'm happy with that. So, salt wash into the graphite enfleur mix, which I've got a little bit left, just to add a little bit of bulk to the corners and edges. So I'm going to pop 1.5 scoops in, or half a scoop on the floor as it might be. That's it. And we're just going to start mixing this together to create a paste, a thick painty paste. I might actually change brushes at this point. I'll see if I can find a chip brush. So you can see just how thick that's gone. It's gone really thick. Let's find a chip brush. So I've got this really old chip brush, which I think will be just great because it's got 2 points on the end. So I'm just going to go in on the edges, adding a little bit of stipple here and there. I have no idea how this will affect the paint inlays. I know that they like to be on a flat surface when applied, so it may break some of my pattern that I want to transfer, but that will be all part of the character of this piece. Plenty on the legs. Before I move on to applying the paint inlays to my textured surface, I'm going to take a little time to explain my mindset and where I'm going with this project. So, I'm going to be using a IOD paint inlay, which I've never used before, which is Gregory's catalogue. This is how it looks in its full 8 sheets. So it's a really large piece. It would fit a large sideboard, but obviously this piece is really, really small. And the inspiration for the project is actually the front cover of the paint inlay. As you can see, it's kind of not the full 8 images, it's just one sheet. And I kind of like that off-kilt, kind of just a few letters going off one way and maybe in a different direction as well. So I'm going to break this up and apply it, probably the main text going from this side around, and maybe changing the angle. I'm not sure just yet, but I will wrap it round each surface, but with different angles, if that makes sense. Stick with me. The colour that I've decided to go with, now this one looks amazing as shown on the back in white, but I'm not going to use white. I'm going to use something else that's quite new to me, which is one of Annie's new colours, Cooler Bar Green. And I think that will work quite well with the monochromatic feel. It's quite pale. The only time I've used this colour is on my workshop table just to try it out, and I really, really like it. So at this stage, I'm going to apply just a really thin coat, a base coat, over the whole piece, maybe just leaving fractions of the colour mix underneath just showing. Then I'm going to allow that to dry, and then we're going to work out just how we're going to lay each paint inlay, making sure that I cut out for each aperture around the handles. It's going to be quite fiddly, but I'm sure it will be worthwhile as it wraps around and goes over the whole piece. So stick with me. Let's get a quick coat of Cooler Bar Green over the piece and then leave this to dry. It needs to be bone dry because we're going to be placing the paint inlays to the surface to work out each cut. Okay, so I'm going to open the paint inlay and lay out the pattern so I can see what's what. I'm going to leave this as a guide up there. and see what we've got. So I'm going to lay them face down so it's easier for me to work out where each sheet goes. That connects to that. This one is the first one. That must be the bottom, and that's the top. So that's one half, the top half, I think. Let's have a little look. Yeah, see, that's the top 4 run along the top. The bottom 4 run, I'm going to use this for the front of the cabinet, and I'm going to use this for the top and the sides somehow. So the best thing to do at this stage is probably take some tape and just apply a bit of tape to each paint inlay at the top and just hang them on the piece just to see how they sit on the piece, and then we can work out where the bottom run is going to go. Using the decorator's tape really does help you apply the paint inlays so you can get a greater view on the overall design. I'm really happy with the way that the top portion wraps around this corner. Now to lay out my lower half of my paint inlays, and I'm kind of figuring out which way around I want this pattern to go. I've had a little play and I think it's going to have to go this way around so that I can wrap it down the side on the horizontal. I'm really happy with my layout of the paint inlays, and I'm going to proceed with taking the little tiny edge off each paint inlay which there is no print. You must remove this because any overlap you will lose some of your pattern. Also, I'm going to make some cuts to wrap around the top surface, so this means using the gridded pattern to measure out carefully each individual element. The same too will apply for the front. This is a little bit fiddly, a little bit difficult, so I'm going to take a little pen to mark out each corner of the aperture of the cupboard door. This will allow me to work out with the gridded pattern where I need to make my overall cuts, so everything sits into place on the top surface and the lower surface of each door aperture. One of the things that I like to do is use one of the straight edges on the piece of furniture. In this case, I've used the top of the cupboard doors so that I can get everything in line. I'm using the grid pattern on the horizontal and vertical to make sure that everything is nice and square. Once you've cut all of your sections out, make sure that you leave them like a big jigsaw puzzle to one side of you, ready for application. So I've made most of my cuts for my paint inlays. The tricky part is the apertures of the doors. There will be a small section that's missing because I've done the internal and the external of the panel. But with some clever painting, I'll be able to make that right. I'm starting with the top and going down. I've made cuts for over this rebate and underneath and then down the side. But this is probably the easiest run to start with, so always find your most comfortable place to start with and proceed. So let's get stuck in with the first inlay. I know that I need about 1 centimetre here at the edge. I'm lining up with the square edge on the end of the paper, and then it should sit nice and square as we go along. So I'm going to lift the paper up, or the inlay up. I'm remembering kind of where the pattern is. Here I don't want to use as much paint because I want to keep some of my textural stuff. So I'm keeping an eye on what I got to work with. So turn it upside down, open the can of paint, cooler bar, and it's super warm in my workshop. There is no air conditioning here, so I know that I have to work pretty quick with the paint inlay, otherwise it will dry out. So in with any what way. Remember, I'm not going to go all the way there, don't need to, but a healthy amount of paint. A little mist of water there just to keep the paint fluent. And then I like to spritz the underside, or the paint side, which is going down, of the inlay. So I'm just going to give it a light mist. It just adds a flexibility to the paint inlay. And then really, we're just going to drop in centimetre from the bottom, from the top. I can pull this a little bit more this way. Don't be frightened of them. You have got a little bit of wriggle room with them. And then I can kind of smudge this in. I'm going to give it another spritz on the top surface. Remember, paint side down. Then you'll see the pattern come a little bit more clear. You could use a sponge to tap this down, or you could use your bray roller. Now I know that I need a little bit more paint under here. That's the first inlay down. So now we're going to go fetch the next inlay and proceed forward. Any what way with the brush. Spritz again the inlay on the back side, or paint side, which is going down into the fresh paint. And then we're going to do a bit of a wiggle so we can line up exactly where it meets. There we go. Once you get the swing, they'll go down nice and easy. Spritz the underside. The pattern should come sharper. Use your hand just to kind of stretch and smooth out. In with the braid roller again. So you're getting good contact to contact in the paint. Then we have a small sliver that's going on the end. Same again. We'll come the other side. Line everything up. Push it round. Into the grooves. So I'm now day 2 of my paint inlay project. I've actually left the inlays overnight to dry. This has allowed it 17 hours of drying time. Now this is something that I've never done before. With chalk paint you can leave the paint inlays a much longer time, up to 24 hours I'm told. I normally leave them up to about 1 to 2 hours. As long as that sheet is bone dry on the surface, you can then reactivate it with water and remove the paint inlay. We are going to get what we're going to get. I'm hoping that we've got a good contact to contact, a really sharp image. Fingers crossed, guys. Also, that I wanted to point out at this stage, where I treat the wood wormholes and filled, there's a few little spots. It's kind of, it's a little bit like bleed through where those spots were. I quite like the look. That's why you would have primed it if you don't want that look. I'm gonna add to it. I think I'm gonna add some speckles and flecks after we've done some distressing maybe. Let's get the paint inlays off. Slowly, slowly does it. Peeling back very close to the surface. Let's take a look at what we've got. I find the best way to remove the paint inlay from your project is to moisten the whole back side of the carrying sheet with an atomizer and a damp sponge to slide back the paint inlay to reveal all of its glory. So here we have it, so much joy removing the paint inlays, and I'm pretty happy with the way that this has turned out. It looks almost as good as the print on the paint inlay. There are a few anomalies on the letter A here. I feel like that's a little bit faded, and of course we've got the rebate from the aperture of the cupboards just to fill in. So I'm going to be using some Athenian black chalk paint just to kind of cover off any of the areas that I'm not keen on. I've popped a little bit into a saucer so that I can work with this as my palette. I've also got the cooler bar. There's a few areas like the top of this tee, it's a little bit high, so I may take a little bit of that out. And I do want to touch up some of the connections between where the paint inlay ended into the overall finish. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to take a little bit of time to finesse this before I allow it to dry, and then we're going to use a mix of lacquer and water 50-50 through a spray bottle just to seal down all of the paint inlay before I move on to doing any distressing or maybe adding some more paint over the top. I'm not too sure yet. So that's what you need to do. It will help hold down the paint on the paint inlays. And then of course you can wax at the end for that lovely, subtle, soft, mellow feel over the whole piece. So at this stage, I've got some decisions to make, one of which I've just off camera painted the inside of the doors. That's one coat of the cooler bar. I've made sure to go right into the bar that's inside there, and then I will paint a contrasting colour on the inside, making a neat line with some masking tape, decorator's tape on the inside. But before I seal this off with my lacquer, 50-50 lacquer and water mix, I thought it might be a good opportunity to start scraping back some of the distressed salt wash. How I'm going to do that is with some coarse sandpaper and a razor blade in this gadget, which is good for cleaning paint off glass. And I'm just going to pull across the salt wash and reveal some of the undercolours. Oh, that's just gone in my tea. Okay, a bit of paint in tea, won't mind. So I will go down to the wood in some sections, but just gently scrape away at the edges and maybe a little bit of sandpaper. I can go over the lacquer with some more distressing, but the only reason I'm starting now is because the lacquer could make the paint kind of chewy. So I'm just going to do a little bit of distressing now, maybe a little bit of distressing afterwards, maybe some fly speck over the top of that, and then we can paint the inside and wax. So a little bit more work to go. I'm just going to proceed with the scraper and some coarse sandpaper just to reveal some of that lovely texture. Okay, so that's my distressing just about done at this stage. All that's left to do now is lacquer the surface with my 50-50 mix in a spray bottle. So what I've done is I've taken a cup of clear matte Annie Sloan lacquer. Don't forget to give it a good old stir before you tip it out of the can. Then topped it up with the 50% water. I've shaken the bottle really well so it's incorporated, and just left to sit for a little while. The other thing that I wanted to say at this stage was be very careful, be mindful of your actual design when you're distressing, because if you hit that with sandpaper or with a scraper, you can remove some of the paint. So I've been very careful to go around the edges, and you also might have noticed that I went in with an Annie Sloan sanding pad with a medium and a fine sanding pad just to really soften and blend away. And then once I was happy with the overall finish, I took a dusting brush and made sure that it was well dusted off the areas, making sure that the dark sections are nice and crisp and clear, ready to receive the lacquer. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to hit this with a spritz of lacquer all over, just gently. My spray bottle is quite a fine mist, so it should be good just to hit it a couple of times with a few pumps, allow that to dry, and then hit it again. So don't spray too much and hit it so it trickles down the piece. You just need enough just to, it's a little bit like setting with hairspray. You need to just hit enough just to make sure that that's sealed down nice and well. Before I finish the exterior of my project, I'm going to turn my attention to the interior. So I've been looking for a colour that I think will contrast really well with Cooler Bar. You may see this is quite a pale blue, but I see it as a pale green mixed with a bit of blue. And on Annie's colour wheel, those shades are opposite, so the complementary colour are somewhere within the warm, rich colours. Something like Primer Red or Scandinavian Pink, something really earthy will suit to create a wonderful contrast for the interior. I'm not going to use any of those shades. I've got a colour that I mixed for an interior project, which was my kitchen stools. I cannot remember the colour mix. It was definitely Primer Red. I think there was Furl in there. There may have been some Emperor Silk. There was a few colours that I hit this with just to, maybe a bit of Barcelona Orange. But it's like a rich terracotta colour, which I think will work really well for the interior. I'm also going to paint the backboard, which we cut earlier on in the project, and reattach that probably at the last moment, so it's easier to wax inside the project. I can get in from both sides. The other thing that I'm going to do is I've painted a little way into the aperture of the cupboard. I'm going to line some tape with the edge of this piece of wood so I get a nice clean line all the way around before I start painting. So I'm at the final hurdle before waxing. I'm going to add a little bit more of a distressed look. I'm going to add one of my signature looks, which is Fly Speck. You may have seen me do this before. I'm going to be doing it slightly different today because of the paint mix is slightly thicker, and that is due to the fact that this has got lacquer on. And I'm going to be firing the Fly Speck directly at the piece. If it's too runny, it will trickle down. And ordinarily, I would do this unwaxed, unfinished, and it would kind of grab to the chalk paint. So this is my colour mix. I've made a Cooler Bar green with just a fraction of graphite, just to darken it, because I do want them to slightly show on the Cooler Bar, but it's more for hitting the text really. And then we're going to do a darker version of this. So we're going to use Enfleur and graphite just to finish off in the distressed areas here and there, just the odd little bit. So these are to imitate age and patina, a little bit like the woodworm holes originally, even though they're all vanished now. So the mix in the here is probably 20% water to this colour mix. You can see it's slightly more soupy, and what I suggest you do is once you've mixed this up is take a board of wood or a sheet of paper, hold it upright and fire away and see how your Fly Speck hit the piece. I've already done that. And what I would also suggest is start with a leg somewhere out of the way and build your way up so you can get a feeling for how this is going to sit. Brush wise, I have a few different types of brush. This brush is a cheap chip brush with natural hair, and it was long and I've chopped it in half, so that's a great flicky brush. I've got this gorgeous little paint pixie brush, which I use this as well. Still got the long bristles, but it's got quite a nice, what's the way of calling it, twang. Pull it back, flicks forward. You could try a synthetic brush. This is a nanny brush. You could try that, but I think the paint pixie brush is going to be perfect for this job. Okay, so I'm at the final hurdle of the project. I'm just going to add a touch more fly speck, this time in a darker shade, which is graphite and enfleur mixed into a small container. Same consistency, just a little bit soupy. And the other thing that I wanted to mention at some point whilst doing the fly speck is if you have one that's kind of gone a little bit flying saucer in shape, or it's in the wrong place, or you're just generally unhappy with the way it's looking, because there's lacquer on the surface, you can take a damp cloth and just remove it, but be very careful. You need to dab away the edges to make sure that the colour is true, because if you leave a residue of paint there, once you've waxed, it will have a mucky mark. So just be really gentle and remove anything that you don't like. Hit it again with some more fly speck once that's dry and you're good to go. So just to find a little bit to go, the back will go back on. I'll wax first, wax the whole piece, and then I'm complete.
Bye.